1988. Video game promoter Hank Rogers of Bulletproof Software attends a convention to promote the game Go, which is described as chess but harder. Nobody seems to be interested in it, and the young lady he recruited to help promote it gets her attention drawn to another game. Hank approaches the Tetris booth, and despite his doubts, he is soon captivated by the game. Hank later visits Eddie, the bank manager. He informs Eddie how obsessed he has gotten with Tetris, and how he has now acquired the PC gaming console and arcade rights to Tetris. Hank then told Eddie the tale of Tetris, beginning with its creator, Alexei Pajitnov. 4 years ago, Alexei worked as a programmer for the Russian government while also developing games. With the help of other co-workers, Alexei was able to transform Tetris from a simple game, using falling parentheses instead of the popular colored blocks, to a more colorful one, increasing its popularity. 2 years later, Robert Stein of Andromeda Software discovered Tetris while traveling around Europe, purchasing game properties at cheap prices and profiting from their sale in the United States. Stein would pester Alexei's supervisors until they submitted the licensing request to Elorg. Stein would then travel to London to meet with wealthy media businessman Robert Maxwell of Microsoft and his snobbish son Kevin to negotiate an international licensing agreement in exchange for royalties. Hank continues his story by informing Eddie that the day before, he visited Nintendo's headquarters in Japan to speak with CEO Hiroshi Yamauchi. Hank demonstrates Tetris to Yamauchi, who is impressed by it. Despite receiving an initial buyout offer of $500,000, Hank declines it in order to build a partnership with Yamauchi, telling him that their collaboration is comparable to Mario and Luigi or Zelda and Link. Hank then requests a $3 million loan from Eddie for Nintendo cartridges and arcade consoles. Eddie agrees once Hank agrees to higher interest rates and pledges his house as collateral. Hank speaks with his wife, Akemi, in his Tokyo apartment. She expresses her reservations about his deal, but Hank points out that their children are so into Tetris that the house is silent. His eldest daughter, Maya, is particularly fascinated by it. Hank talks on the phone with Kevin, who informs him that he and his father have already sold arcade rights to Sega Japan. Hank becomes enraged and returns to Nintendo to confront Yamauchi and request residuals in advance. Yamauchi invites Hank to meet with his colleagues in Seattle. Hank travels to Seattle to meet with Nintendo's president, Minoru Arakawa, and vice president Howard Lincoln. They show him the Game Boy, the trendy new handheld console that will be released alongside Super Mario Land, but Hank convinces them that it should be integrated with Tetris instead, and he promises to buy handheld license rights. Hank then rushes to London to meet with the Maxwells, who are already having an argument with Stein after he confronts them about not receiving his cash. Hank requests to purchase the handheld rights, but receives no clear reaction from the Maxwells. After Hank and Stein leave, Kevin challenges his father about money vanishing from employees' retirement accounts, but Maxwell dismisses the inquiry and focuses on acquiring Tetris. On their walk out, Hank and Stein appear to be making a deal for the handheld rights. Arakawa and Lincoln call Hank to inform him that Stein is selling handheld rights to Atari for $100,000 in retaliation for the Maxwells failing to pay him. Despite Arakawa and Lincoln's warnings about the dangers of visiting communist Russia, Hank decides to travel to Moscow personally to meet with Elorg and get the rights. When Hank arrives in Moscow, he meets Sasha, a young woman who will become his translator. She takes him to Elorg, despite her concerns that he might get in trouble for wandering in without an invitation. They meet Elorg president Nikolai Belikov, and Hank starts explaining his business to him. Hank learns from Sasha's translations that ELORG only licenses PC rights, not console or handheld. Hank gives Belikov a personal copy of Japanese Tetris, although he believes it is an illegal copy. Despite Belikov's orders to leave, Hank persuades him to meet again to negotiate the terms of the transaction. On their way out of Elorg, Hank is approached by shady KGB agents and told to leave the country. Kevin arrives in Moscow and meets Valentin Trifonov, a member of the Communist Party's Central Committee and chairman of the Department of Foreign Trade. Due to their links to Mikhail Gorbachev, the Maxwells believe they have a simpler way of acquiring Tetris. The following day, Hank and Sasha return to Elorg and meet Alexei for the first time, along with Trifonov and his soldiers. Trifonov accuses Hank of illegal actions, such as showing up with a fake tourist visa, and Alexei does not immediately trust Hank's motives. Belikov reveals to them that no one ever purchased the arcade rights for Tetris. Stein and Kevin arrive separately to meet with Belikov, while Hank reviews the signed deal and concludes that Stein stole arcade rights. Belikov grants Stein a new contract for the handheld rights. Alexei then gives Hank and Sasha a ride home. Kevin meets with Trifonov again after discovering they were spying on his meeting with Belikov. Trifonov confesses to Kevin that communism in Russia will soon come to an end, and he wants to fulfill their agreement as well. Maxwell is bribing Trifonov behind Kevin's back to help him secure Tetris. That night, Hank pays a visit to Alexei's home and eats dinner with him and his wife, Nina. While Nina initially believes Hank stole Tetris, he proves to them that he is honest about his goals. Alexei then shows Hank the original version of Tetris and lets him play. Alexei and Nina hide Hank when they hear a knock on the door, afraid it is an agent of the KGB. Alexei tries to get Hank to leave after realizing it's only a neighbor asking for salt, but Hank insists on accompanying him so they can continue to talk. Alexei leads Hank to a bar where he meets other people who want independence from the Soviet Union. They all party and dance to the final countdown, and Hank forms a bond with Alexei. Unfortunately, the KGB has been spying on Hank and taking pictures of him, prompting them to locate his family and threaten Akem and the children at her workplace in exchange for Hank's return home. Other KGB agents locate Hank, abuse him, and steal his pants, because they are Levi's. He returns to his hotel room, only to discover that it has been trashed before Sasha arrives. She explains why the KGB is chasing him and attempts to persuade him to leave, even unexpectedly kissing him before Hank reminds her that he is married. Trifonov later meets Alexei with his kids Dmitry and Peter, implicitly threatening him with the same fate as his father. Meanwhile, Hank calls Akimi and asks her to contact his lawyers. Hank and Stein return to Elorg separately. Stein complains to Belikov about the new contract but eventually agrees and signs. Hank confronts Belikov about everything that has happened and attempts to reach a new agreement for $25,000 in upfront royalties and 25 cents for each copy of the game sold, as Hank is broke and desperate. He predicts that Tetris might sell up to 20 million copies, earning Belikov $5 million. Belikov then meets Trifonov outside, who informs him that Tetris is going to Mirrorsoft. The two then meet with Kevin, and Belikov offers Mirrorsoft Tetris if they wire $1 million within a week. Belikov then talks privately with Hank about making his own offer within a week and handing him a letter of intent to sign. Alexei meets Hank and rides with him in a cab to avoid being followed. Alexei tells Hank what happened to his father. He was a university professor who signed a letter of complaint for a colleague who was incarcerated for selling his book overseas, which damaged Alexei's father's career. He then reveals to Hank that Sasha is a KGB agent who has been especially targeting him for his perceived threat, and they witness her speaking with Trifonov. Alexei then takes Hank to an airport. Hank promises to attend to Maya's school concert, but he doesn't show up. Meanwhile, Maxwell meets with Arakawa and Lincoln to ensure Mirrorsoft obtains Tetris, and Trifonov sends one of his men to assault Belikov on Maxwell's orders. Back at his flat, Hank receives a fax informing him that he has been dropped from the Tetris agreement, as well as a menacing photo of Sasha kissing him that may be disclosed to his family. Akemi and Maya arrive, with Akemi chastising Hank for missing Maya's concert. But Hank is more concerned about losing the contract and everything they have, prompting Maya to rush to her room and cry. Belikov pays Alexei a visit in his residence. He informs Alexei that Tetris would be sold to Mirrorsoft, and Belikov will be dismissed as head of Elorg unless Alexei can put things right. He gives Alexei a letter of intent to fax to Henk, something he does at work. At the same time, Kevin discovers his father burning documents, and when he asks for the $1 million required to pay Elorg, Kevin responds that they do not have that money. After receiving the letter, Henk returns to Nintendo and confronts Arakawa and Lincoln, showing them the letter. Henk later discovers that Atari stole Nintendo's patent and is selling Tetris cartridges. Henk claims Stein and the Maxwells lied, and the letter expired the day before, implying Atari has no rights to Tetris. Henk persuades Arakawa and Lincoln to accompany him to Moscow to finalize their agreement before the Maxwells do anything else. Alexei discovers he has been fired and sees his stuff being repossessed. He also discovers Trifonov talks with Dmitri and Peter, making additional implicit threats to throw them over a precipice. Trifonov calls Maxwell to continue their dealings, and Sasha discovers Trifonov is trying to work things out for his personal benefit rather than the country's interests. Afterward, Stein confronts the Maxwells by hitting Kevin in the face for going to Moscow and attempting to make the Elorg transaction behind his backpack, cheating him out of his money. Maxwell reads the information and decides to travel to Moscow with Kevin to directly speak with Gorbachev and work against Henk. When Henk returns, he rushes to visit Alexei, who refuses to see him because of everything he has sacrificed by working with Henk. Not far away, Trifonov and his henchmen learn about Henk's return and rush to Elorg. The Maxwells arrive at Elorg first to complete their transaction, followed by Henk, Arakawa, and Lincoln. Maxwell orders Belikov to sign until Henk realizes the Maxwells do not have any money to pay Elorg with. Belikov sees through the lies and declines to sign. Maxwell attempts to attack him, but Belikov delivers a well-deserved headbutt to the face. Belikov registers with Nintendo and instructs the trio to leave Moscow immediately. Trifonov confronts Maxwell, revealing his dealings in front of Kevin and Sasha after learning they had lost the contract. Trifonov goes after Henk, Arakawa, and Lincoln, but Alexei arrives to pick them up and transport them to the airport. This leads to a high-speed chase with KGB goons pursuing the four men. They get to the airport and take the first flight out. Trifonov believes they are flying to Tokyo and boards the plane, only to discover they are on a separate flight. Sasha arrives to arrest Trifonov for treason. Henk returns to his Tokyo flat and builds a temporary stage for Maya to compensate for missing her concert. He apologizes to her in Japanese, and she puts on the show for him while he watches alongside Akimi. He also shows her the $5 million check for bulletproof software. Later, the Game Boy is introduced with Tetris, which sells out twice in Japan before coming to the United States. Gorbachev resigns and borders are being opened throughout Europe. Henk gives Alexei a copy of the Game Boy. Alexei and his family eventually travel to the United States, where they meet the Rogers family. Henk and Alexei give each other a hug. According to the final text, Henk Rogers and Alexei Pajitnov collaborated to develop the Tetris Company. Robert Stein continued to license games, but he never recovered from the loss of Tetris. Robert Maxwell stole nearly $900 million from pension funds and accumulated more than $5 billion in debt, causing his media empire to crumble before his untimely death. Kevin was eventually arrested in connection with the theft, declared bankruptcy, and was subsequently acquitted of fraud. In 2014, Henk appointed Maya as Tetris's new CEO. With over 1 billion units sold, Tetris is still one of the most popular games of all time.